Those of us who remember the year 2000 will think of the first camera phones, USB drives, reality TV, and MP3 players. After we were not taken over by robots at the turn of the millennium, the dot-com bubble burst, the twin towers fell, and the rest of us were busy dialing up the modem to chat to strangers on MSN Messenger.
You already know my name. And you can see that I'm a machine.
I'm afraid. I'm afraid.
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast. I'm Anna Bagutska, your podcast host. I'm a critic and the author of Feeding the Monster, and in this series of the Final Girls podcast, I'm crawling through the tangled wires that make up the intersection of horror and technology, from sentient robots to haunted websites. This season, we are diving deep into machines. Every episode, I'm joined by a guest to talk about a film, or two, or four, and how it captures our fears and anxieties around technology and the place it holds in our lives. This week, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going full Y2K. For some, this might just be a category on ASOS.com, but for others, it was a moment we remember semi-fondly. Low-rise jeans, casual misogyny, and horror films doing the absolute most. In this episode, we're looking at a wave of horror films from the early 2000s that channeled the paranoia and confusion of the emerging digital age. Films like My Little Eye, The Collingswood Story, and Feardotcom, all of them from 2002, and Untraceable, which came a little later in 2008. These films reflect a new kind of fear, the fear of being watched, and the dangers of surveillance. And they captured, even if unknowingly, something uniquely terrifying about the time. Joining me to unpick these lo-fi gems is author and friend of the show, Kirsty Logan, whose books include Things We Say in the Dark, Now She Is Witch, and The Gloaming. Don't worry, we don't actually spoil any of these films, as we talk more broadly about what they tell us about this particular moment in time, so if you've never seen Fear.com, don't worry, we won't spoil it for you. Remember to subscribe and review the podcast if you enjoyed this episode or indeed this series, and check out our Letterboxd page to see what other films we have covered and will be covering in this series. You can drop me a line at hello@thefinalgirls.co.uk to tell me about what your haunted internet would look like. And if you'd like to support the show, you can do so on Patreon at patreon.com/thefinalgirls. And with all that said, please enjoy our take on the horrors of the new millennium. We're going to talk about some real serious cinema.
I think we'll get some good chat over though.
Yeah, I think, the films might not be great, but the chat sure will be. It's been a minute since we spoke. How have you been?
Chaos. Joyful chaos.
That's
but in a good way.
That's the good kind of chaos.
Been watching all kinds of exciting material for this podcast episode, so that's been the joy of the week. I've been really enjoying that.
You know what? I thought of you when I was looking at the films that we might sort of watch, because this is a special little episode, right? We're not talking about one particular film. We've both watched a handful. We both have thoughts. This is more of a conversation about a moment in culture, in horror, in narrative, and aesthetics. But you volunteered very early on for this episode, and it was all hinging on one particular film from the year 2002 that I had not seen before I committed to it. I have now seen. You have now seen twice. And I felt bad while I was watching it, because it was like, I think she's regretting volunteering for this episode. It was going to be all giggles. And then we sat down to watch Fear.com, and I really regretted my choices.
Yeah, do you know what? My choice was even worse because I've seen it before. So I knew what I was letting myself in for. And still, I walked willfully off the cliff into this pit in which we now find ourselves. I did it on purpose. And what can I say? I really feel like, and I will die on this hill, early 2000s was the low point of everything. It was the low point of fashion, film, literature, music, just a real shit. Real shit time.
A high point for technology, though.
Well, yeah, actually, okay, yeah. So there's always a balance in the universe, isn't there? So that's the balance. And but I have a real soft spot for like terrible, extremely sincere, but in the cringiest possible way, like early 2000s horror. I cannot help myself.
Okay, I'm going to pick you up on this in a minute, but before we dive straight into Y2K early 2000s horror, I need to ask you, in the theme and the spirit of this series, what was the first piece of technology that you ever owned or felt like was yours?
So I remember this really distinctly because I am an ancient hag. So I remember this would have been like late 80s because I was born in 84. So it was a Fisher-Price cassette player, and it was like brown and beige plastic with like big chunky buttons that like when you press the play it went clunk and like made a sort of, you could hear the tape hissing as it turned. I remember it. It's such a tactile memory. I remember it so distinctly. I really wish I had it actually. I miss buttons. I miss clunky buttons on things.
Do you know what I miss? As you were talking, I could hear it in my mind. And in the intro for this series, I've been using the dial-up modem sound as the intro, which genuinely sends me, like, gives me a, even though I edit it every single week, it will still give me a fright every time I plonk it into the episode. And I've had messages from people saying that it needs a trigger warning. And I'm sorry, but it's very effective. Yeah. I miss technology with sounds. Like everything is so slick, noiseless. You can choose whether it's on sound, vibrate, or completely silent. I miss technology where you hear the little whirring sound where you put in a tape into a VCR or a cassette into a little Fisher-Price cassette player or a CD even, you know.
Do you know what I think the difference is? And I'm really excited to get stuck into this. I feel like technology now is such an extension of our physical bodies, and I feel like it wasn't when I was a kid. It didn't feel like an extension of my body. It felt like an external object. And now technology is so intimate, like we're all about wearables and they're smaller and smaller and they're going like deeper and deeper inside our bodies. Like my little earphones just go like right inside my ear canal. And like, but I remember having like those big chunky headphones and it didn't feel like it was like attached to my body in the same way. And to me, that's the difference, is it felt external, and now it's, I don't know, technology's creeping like further and further inside our bodies. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm simply observing that
it's very Cronenbergian of you. And I will concur on the creepy little in-ear headphones, because I have those and they freak me out every single time. I keep thinking that my ear is just going to absorb them and then I won't be able to take it out.
Yes. Oh my God. Surely someone's working on that.
I mean, surely someone could invent, although this is, again, already a side note, but speaking of headphones, I'm a big sucker for the over-ear headphones, precisely because I don't like things being put in my ears. But it was interesting, my partner is a big runner, and apparently they recommend, again, everything I've learned about running has been against my will. There are these bone headphones. So these headphones that you put around your ears and they transmit the music or the podcast or whatever through the cartilage and the bones in your ears. And I put them on the other day and it was freakier than the ones that go inside of your eardrums, because I'm like, how is this magic happening? Why are my bones transmitting music into my ears? I don't like it any more than the in-ear ones, but that is a digression over.
I cannot understand how that works, and I kind of don't want to, because it will freak me out.
Voodoo. Let's just call it that. But
I'll accept it.
Do you think that this kind of relationship between the body and the tech is the most interesting thing for you about tech horror, or is it something else?
For me, yes. I think, I mean, we're going to see some really interesting works dealing with AI in the next few years. I know there have been some already, but I think they're going to become even more interesting. People really engaging with how LLMs are affecting the way that we think or do not think, the way that I think, the way that we use LLMs like ChatGPT, they're going to affect how we use language. So right now, I think I can usually tell when, I do a lot of teaching of creative writing, I can kind of tell when students have used it. I never tell them absolutely don't. I'm going to say, please think this through very carefully before you do this. But there's going to come a point very soon where I won't be able to tell. And the reason I won't be able to tell is because not because the LLMs are going to get better, but because our own spoken and written language, I think, may degrade to match the LLM.
That's really interesting. That is a much more nuanced approach about the moral panic going on around ChatGPT and AI right now, particularly when it comes to the creative industries and writing in particular, us being our language and our writing being influenced by the conventions of your ChatGPT is quite interesting. Like, I've seen a lot of people online, and myself included, I use and misuse M dashes all the time when I write. And that is one of the telling points that something has been created by ChatGPT. And there's been a lot of people kind of jokingly and half jokingly protesting online. It's like, but I also use those all the time.
It's not as simple as that, though. It's a tonal thing. It's that kind of empty cheerfulness. It's the kind of tone of authority as well. I see it a lot in students' work. It's just really, really clear to me, but I'm fully aware that there is a fleeting period of time where I'm going to be able to tell. That is going to be over very quickly because, I don't think it's that the LLM will get better, that we won't be able to tell it apart from human speech. I think human speech is going to sound more like ChatGPT.
Well, on that depressing note, let's go back to another depressing moment in our history, in our lived history. It's always quite interesting to me when we get to a point in these series that I do where actually this is a moment in time where we lived through it. We were conscious or semi-conscious beings that could notice things going on around us, and we're engaging with pop culture and with horror and remember and now can reminisce about things like Y2K and the moral panic around computers and the turn of the millennium and what culture was at that point. So what is your memory of that particular moment in pop culture of the turn of the millennium?
Yeah, I mean, shite. No.
One word.
One word, yeah. I think it was, like, obviously you could always pick out great things that came out around that time, but I just think it was not a great time to be alive. I think for women, especially, like, I was a young woman, I was 16 at that time. It was a real rough time to be a teenage girl. The way that women were portrayed in media, really, really rough. I know thinness is like coming back in. Apparently we're over body positivity. We're back to thin. But like, I don't know if people are fully aware of like how thin we were told to be at that time. And how, I remember like the thing with Bridget Jones, what an absolute hag beast. She's enormous. And you look at her now and you're like, wow, what a perfectly mid-size, in fact, smaller than mid-size person that is. And at the time, we were supposed to be completely horrified by this thing, which is so ludicrous to think of now. But I just think it was a rough time. I think in terms of like, was I afraid of Y2K? No, because I was 16 and I am a disaster bitch. And I was very excited. I was like, wow, yeah, let's watch. Everything's going to burn down. Cool. Can't wait to see it. Because like I was a teenager, what did I care of consequence? My brain hadn't got anywhere near to being fully developed. So I thought it was great. I thought it was really exciting that everything was going to just go boom, and everybody's bank account was going to be reset to zero, and mortgages weren't going to exist anymore, and everything was just going to break. I thought it was I couldn't wait for the drama, and then we didn't get it really,
and then nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
It was like the most disappointing.
Apparently we had been led to believe that then nothing happened, and it was all just like a chicken licking. Am I using that correctly? It's like a chicken licking moment that we were all running around saying the sky is falling, and then the sky didn't fall. But that actually, it was because a lot of very clever people were working very hard behind the scenes to ensure that the sky didn't fall. So actually, there was a reason to panic. It was just disaster was averted. But again, I'm no tech expert, so that's simply my very, very basic understanding.
Oh, I'm sure they did, and that is what happened. But I'm always fascinated by like that being the first disaster that I remember thinking about quite consciously. Just a few years younger, so I was maybe like 12 when the year 2000 came around, and I remember sort of just for a few seconds, for the minute before the clocks turned to midnight, just sort of looking at the microwave clock, you know? And I remember I was sort of on a holiday with my parents in Andorra, which is like basically this like very, very, very small country that's between France and Spain. And I was sitting there looking at the microwave and being like, is this the moment where everything goes kaboom? Like, does everything turn to shit? Does everything just explode? What's going to happen? Because this wild speculation was the thing that was intriguing. And then nothing happened. And that was probably one of my first big disappointments. So I was like, oh, okay, well then I guess we just eat the grapes and move on with our lives.
Yeah.
But
I'll just put my dinner in the microwave and
I guess the microwave won't kill me. Well, that's dull.
See, fellow disaster bitch. Love it.
I know. I've never heard that term before, but I'm really glad that's come into my life now, because that's a very fair way of describing myself.
I don't know if I don't want to make claim on it. I'm not aware that I've seen it anywhere. As far as I'm aware, it came out of my brain, but I hope it catches on.
You copyright that. Disaster Bitch.
Will.
Coming soon.
Disasterbitch.com.
So where do you think, you mentioned at the start that you have a very soft spot for the horror of the 2000s. And we broadly agree that 2000s culture, which God forbid is now coming back into fashion. Please, I'm not going back to low-rise jeans. It's not happening. Leave us alone. We're not going back there.
Anna, I saw someone in a bubble skirt yesterday.
No, we all agreed. Even the Gen Z, even the Gen Alphas agree they're not good.
Well, I think that ship has sailed. That bubble has bubbled. They're out there.
They'll all come to the same conclusion that we came to in the year 2004. That was a mistake, and we regret our choices.
Yeah, I can't wait for polka dots to come back. Polka dots, I feel like I wore only polka dots for about a year.
Oh, I think I only wore polka dots for maybe like 7 years. I still have some.
Nice.
Yeah.
I just get flashbacks. I can't go anywhere near polka dots anymore.
I haven't had a polka dot mug. Because why not go that far? But there's a general love, and there's been a lot of reconsideration and reappraisal of 90s films, and particularly 90s tech horror films, which, you know, I very lovingly looked back on and oftentimes kind of reconsidered as ahead of their time or prescient in some way. Where do you think our standing of 2000s era horror is currently?
I think it's as low as it deserves to be. I just have a very you know, your child that disappoints you, but you love them anyway. That's kind of where I am. I do love them. I think there's a difference, right? There are things that you watch or read or listen to and you say, that is good and I enjoy it. Mm-hmm. You can have, that is not good, but I enjoy it. You can have, that is bad and I don't enjoy it. Or you can also have, that is good and I don't enjoy it. And I think for me, this is like the little square,
Yeah.
the 4 options. And for me, a lot of early 2000s, like not just horror, music, even some fashion, dare I say, it is bad, but I like it. Like, I'm not going to make any claim for it being quality or good, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy it, because I do.
What do you enjoy about it?
I think I enjoy the sincerity. I think there's been a bit of a return to sincerity recently. You know, 90s, very cynical, very sarcastic. And I think for a long time, everything was tongue in cheek. Everything was, you know, there would be a line of dialogue in a film and then the response would be like, whoa, that just happened, like drawing attention to itself. And I think we're coming back from everything being cynical, everything being skeptical. I don't think we'll ever really regain that kind of millennial optimism. I think that there was a real sincerity. And even in like all of these films that we're talking about, they're not good, but they're also not bad on purpose. There are no snakes on a plane. They're not even like Con Air. Like, I love Con Air. I love Face Off. Like, I love that kind of thing. I actually recently watched Bound, rewatched Bound with my cis-het male partner who, not surprisingly, had not seen Bound, but was like, do you know what, darling? Let's do some queer culture together. And so we watched Bound and he was like, this film's amazing. And I love
It's
it.
amazing. I was really worried that you were going to trash Bound, and I was ready to fight for it.
I would never. I love Bound. I love it so deeply. But I loved that he was on the same page, that he was like, do you know what? Not only is it like tongue in cheek, it's also genuine. And I think that is so hard to pull off. So few films pull that off. The only example I can think of off the top of my head is The Princess Bride, which is like a send-up, right? It's like a send-up of a genre, but it also is a very effective version of that genre. So Bound is a send-up of noir, but it also is a very effective noir story. And I think that is so tough to pull off. And he got it. He was like, yes, no, I kind of love this ironically, but also genuinely at the same time. So yeah, no, I really, really love it. And I think there's something about the early 2000s that we really thought we were doing a thing. We really thought we were cool. Like, we really did. Like, the Feardotcom aesthetic, I cannot wait to dig into this aesthetic because I remember, I think I had this on VHS, you know. I remember just thinking like this, the aesthetic of this is so cool. And I just think that's not in a way that's ever going to be seen sincerely, because we were so sincere. We really were. I don't know how we went away from that kind of 90s. We tried the most. We were kind of gone away from this like 90s cynicism. I feel like the 80s, you know, big hair, bombastic, real like balls to the wall, everything turned up to 10. And then like 90s, total response to that, slacker, sarcastic. And then 2000s, it's not like this big bombastic optimistic 80s thing. I know the 80s had a lot of darkness as well, but the 2000s, it was just this sincerity, but also this it's not cynicism, it's like a grossness. There's like a real gross sincerity. Like, everything's a bit grubby, a bit ugly. The colors are wrong. There's an ugly filter over everything. But it was done so sincerely. It's sickly. It's like a sickly, dark sincerity that I just don't think we can reclaim. And it's so much of its time in a way that I just find absolutely fascinating.
To bring it into internet terms, because my brain has been completely rotted by TikTok, if the 90s were the clean girl aesthetic in horror, 2000s horror is like the gremlin rotting sister. Because there is, I agree that I would not think of sincerity as the word to describe 2000s horror, but I think you have to be genuine to go so hard on so very little substance. And I say that with love, because the films that we've watched and that we'll broadly be discussing is the kind of the jumping off points to talk about how horror was reacting and changing with the advent of home computers and the internet, and how the internet was essentially like infecting the aesthetic and the themes and the stories that horror filmmakers were coming up with. Films like My Little Eye and the Collingswood Story and Feardotcom, all of those from the year 2002. And there's other precedents, right, that I'll be touching upon in future episodes, like Pulse from 2001. There's later films like Untraceable and Cam and Host and Searching even, and so many others that kind of have used internet language for their story purposes. But the films of the time are so interesting because they're not perhaps as well formed as something like Saw, which has a lot of those same, very out there camera work, the sickly filters, everything is yellow, everything is green, and there's like a real rot and cruelty to it. But Saw is a really, I think, well-rounded film that then gave birth to a very intense and beloved franchise, which I have a lot of time for. But there's something about these films that is not just sincere, but it's also cruel. Like a lot of them, you know how in the 90s, the slasher revival kind of really distinguished itself from the 80s, because the 80s were just like a parade of bodies just being torn to shreds. Like, you can't remember any characters' names. It's just like, how many kills is there? And in the 90s, you got these characters, and they were quippy, and they were postmodern, and they were ironic, and they were too cool for school. And you wanted to hang out with them, and you were sad when they died. Their deaths mattered. That's why those films became so iconic. And here in these films, I'm like, I watched all of these films this week. Cannot tell you a single character's name or a single personality trait that they had. But my God, did those films want to make them suffer?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I watched Feardotcom this morning. I couldn't tell you what either of the main characters' names are.
It's Steven Dorff.
Yeah.
Steven Dorff, Steven Rea.
That's it. We don't know their names.
No.
Who cares?
Yeah, and I think the cruelty element goes hand in hand with the sincerity element, even though they might seem strange bedfellows. Because I also I think we went into a different place in the 2010s with the so-called elevated horror space, and now we're somewhere else entirely. But is there anything else that you think of when you think of 2000s horror?
Well, I'm often quite aware that I'm not going to point fingers at anyone in specific. The creative people behind the film, I don't know exactly where we're going to lay this accusation, but they really thought they were doing a thing. And they're not doing a thing. There's nothing. They were
doing
there.
Something. They were doing a lot of something.
A lot of something which adds up to nothing. And I feel like as much as I love so many recent horror movies, like I just rewatched Talk to Me the other day. Amazing. Absolutely love it.
Incredible.
Like not a wasted second in that movie. So good. I feel like though, there's this real awareness that it's a film and somebody is going to write a PhD thesis on it. And so they should. And they'll probably write something great about it. I feel like the makers of My Little Eye and Fear.com, they didn't think anybody was going to write a thesis on what they were doing. They thought they were doing a thing, but they're kind of, there's something missing. There's like a basic understanding of narrative language that is missing in a way that I actually find really interesting. It's kind of like I really like badly translated idioms, or like idioms from other languages that when you translate them, you're like, that's not right. That just feels wrong in a way that I can't really identify. And I feel like a lot of these films are like that. It's sort of again, maybe it's very modern, maybe it's the ChatGPT thing. It's like the appearance of meaning. And yet when you actually hold it in your hands for more than 2 seconds, it just crumbles like sand. There's nothing there.
Okay, I'm going to slightly disagree, but not really. So I do think that the filmmakers of Fear.com and My Little Eye I think they were hoping that somebody was going to write a PhD about it. I think it is a whole lot of nothing, but I think all of these films, and I thought this about every single film that I watched, I'm like, ooh, that is a great elevator pitch. That is a great central idea, and you've done nothing with it. You've not explored it in depth. The story lags. There's not enough character development. Like, you're correct. There's no narrative. The aesthetic is always too much and doesn't commit to anything. But there is one central idea that is just badly explored or insufficiently explored, which is why they end up feeling hollow, because there's a lot of things happening and they amount to nothing. But at the end of each one of these films, I come out of them thinking, like, damn, that one idea was great. I wish someone more talented would explore it. You know what I mean? I
love that. And you know what? That is what should be remade. Like, why are we remaking?
I agree.
Why are we remaking good films? Remake films that have a really good central idea but couldn't pull it off.
Honestly,
that's what we should remake.
I would watch the hell out of a Feardotcom remake, because that film is a piece of shit, but it has such a good, creepy central idea.
And like, the aesthetics, I have to say, are flawless. Like, I know we agree on the set design. We'll get into it, but get that set designer back. 10 out of 10 for set design. 0 out of 10 for everything else.
I mean, the other film that we haven't watched in preparation for this, but I have a soft spot for because I watched it endlessly when I was growing up, is 13 Ghosts, and 13 spelled like 13 with the numbers and the letters. And that is a remake of a William Castle film. And I want that shit remade because it is so aggressively in your eyeballs. Like, that is an assaulting film, and so is Fear.com. But I wonder, I think the 3 films from 2002 that we're talking about are quite interesting visually. So for anyone who's not seen them, first of all, don't. Second of all,
we'll save you some time.
Yeah. I'll briefly summarize what they're for so you kind of know what we're talking about. So My Little Eye is like a Big Brother type situation, a house, and these 6 young people are put there on the premise that if they survive 6 months in that house together without anybody leaving after curfew, they will get $1 million. Back when $1 million was like a lot of money. The Collingswood Story is a desktop horror all seen through essentially a fake version of MSN, of like pre-Zoom, where you can video chat. And it's a girlfriend and a boyfriend, and the girlfriend is staying in this old creepy house that turns out has a secret spooky history, and some people may have been murdered there. Fear.com is like 7 on like a very toxic combination of like meth and cocaine.
It's like 7 plus The Ring, but terrible.
So Fear.com is about
it's got 3% on Rotten Tomatoes.
It's iconic. It's about a serial killer who transmits his kills through the internet, like a snuff viewing website, like a snuff YouTube. But then actually, it's 3 movies in one. Actually, it's about the ghost of one of his victims that uses the internet to then murder other people within 48 hours of them watching one of his murder videos. It gets way too convoluted. And also, it's about Stephen Dorff and Natasha McElhorn trying to find the serial killer and also maybe falling in love. And also, it is about how Natasha's DOH kind of health investigator woman has the most stunning apartment I've seen in the 2000s movie. It's that and the film Gossip with Lena Headey.
Oh my god, I love that film. I'd forgotten about that until this exact moment.
I just love the apartments in that film. I love the apartments.
Oh my god, yeah.
Do you think those are fair summaries of those films? So we know what we're talking about.
I do. And I will say, like, of the 3, the Collingswood Story is the only one that I think is actually worth the time to view. I don't think it's great, but I think it's got more interest in it than the other 2. Actually, I have strong feelings about all of them.
Go for it.
And I think what links them all is, and it ties in exactly with what you were saying, all 3 of them, an inability to nail the landing, to nail the ending. I mean, Fear.com kind of fails to nail the whole thing, but I think the other 2, like for the other 2, the whole way through, I was thinking, I remember thinking these were quite bad, but I'm really, really enjoying this. And then when it got to the end, I was like, oh yeah, that's why.
Yeah. I will say the My Little Eye ending I kind of liked it. Also, by the way, spoiler alert, it's not really a spoiler for My Little Eye, but there is a surprise appearance by a very young Bradley Cooper. And I literally, as I was watching it, went, huh.
I know.
Like, oh my God, Bradley, what are you doing here?
I know. I play this game. Do you ever play Movie Grid online?
Yes, all the
Yeah,
time.
I was like, oh my God, I'm remembering this for when he comes up on Movie Grid.
Yeah. But yeah, I actually thought that the end, there's quite a few twists in that film that I won't reveal. And I did actually find myself being like, oh, okay, this is like a relatively simple but effective twist. And apparently, and I have not experienced this, when they released it on DVD, they did a commentary where you get to watch the film only from the POV of the villains. Let's just say that,
nice.
instead of the characters. So I'm like, oh, that's quite clever. That is really clever.
I mean, I thought that film actually made some really interesting, I mean, I'm a writer, so I'm always going to come at things from like a narrative perspective. And I thought it made some really interesting narrative choices, which we can dig into. Mm-hmm. I was so with it until the last 15 minutes. I have to say, I disagree on the ending. I think the ending's terrible. But then I'm also like, with this kind of setup, where do you go? Actually, it is hard to nail the landing.
There's also something, you know, I think your sincerity point and the cruelty as well that I was talking about is very central in both these films, because there is a whole thing about like watching these characters suffer, and really especially characters that are presented to be good and innocent and kind of really toying with their suffering, like in Feardotcom, which is kind of has this interesting premise of, you know, a ghost controlling the internet and a chat room essentially being like a haunted house. Like the haunted internet as a concept is amazing. It just does very little with it. And this idea of this victim who was innocent, not turning into a vengeful spirit and not actually being, I mean, this is fully ripped off from The Ring, where once her body is rescued, they think, traditional Gothic stories would say, that, well, now the haunting will stop. It doesn't, because cruelty begets cruelty and it just never ends. And the cycle doesn't stop. And if you're dealing with a haunted internet, you could argue, like, if this was a film that had something to say, they might have gone in a direction of like, well, how do you put limits on a haunted house, or the haunted house is the internet and there is no physical limit to it? Everything is haunted.
Oh, even that, what a good tagline. Remake Feardotcom, make that the tagline. How do you escape a haunted house when it's the internet? And it's everywhere now. Like, we can't disconnect now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
See, we've already made it better. Better.
Remake it. I'll write the script. I'm in.
So
we can co-write it. Yes.
What did you think then? You know, you mentioned that you thought My Little Eye had some interesting narrative choices, as did Fear.com. What did you think where did you think the stories, what's a nice way of phrasing this? What did you make of the stories and their concerns?
I like that. What you're saying is, Kirsty, what the hell are you talking about? Why would you say this mad thing? Here we go. I will give you 3 specifics that I think are really good storytelling choices in My Little Eye. Again, I always think it's interesting as a writer to see narratives that don't work very well, because then we can think, well, how could it have worked? What changes could have been made? And I think one thing I think is really good, it's very efficient storytelling. 5 minutes into the film, we know so much plot, because it does this quite aesthetic, I think, like kind of 4-way split screen.
Yes.
Where it shows, I think that works really well throughout.
I really like that.
Yeah, I think it's great. So, you know, it starts, we see a little screen of just the ad, the little internet ad, you know, people wanted to live in this house. As you say, that's what the setup is. And then we kind of immediately jump to this like montage almost of months and months passing of these people in this house. They're arguing, they're making friends, they're having like little romantic interludes. So much narrative, very, very efficient storytelling. And I really like that choice. And I think that was not the initial choice, because I take this directly from the IMDb. It says, this film was almost released direct to video after a disastrous test screening of a 4-hour version of the film. And then eventually it was pared down, blah, blah, blah. So I suspect what I think is a very, very smart narrative technique was perhaps not the initial approach, but I like that they were forced into this corner, and I think it's ended up with something much more effective. The second thing that I think works really well is that we, the viewer, do not know any more than the people in the house do. Mm-hmm. As far as we know, they are also doing a reality TV broadcast. We don't know any more than they do. It's not like we get to see who, and usually with this type of film, we would see like the villain POV or the kind of killer POV. We would even just maybe see some little hints, like a little hooded figure outside, like somebody lurking around. We don't see anything. We literally don't know any more than they do. And I think that's a really smart choice. And the third thing that I really like is the way that the characters watch and listen to each other in the house. So they watch each other through peepholes, they listen to each other through doors. So, it's a film about voyeurism, but they are being voyeurs to one another as well. And I think that's really interesting. So I have to say, for 80% of this film, I was thinking, this is making some really smart choices. To me, it completely fell apart at the end, but I do think it was doing some interesting things. I don't think it actually ended up wrapping them up particularly well, but still raising some interesting things.
Well, I think all three of these films are quite interesting in how they're very concerned with surveillance through technology. And I mean, surveillance itself implies technology, although, that's been a trope of classic noir cinema for decades, right? Of, the private eye spying on or surveilling someone who might be up to no good. And now it's everywhere. Like the multi-screen beginning and even the whole concept of My Little Lie is that you're in a house, you're being observed all the time. And that is very much, and I think I read that the filmmakers were even inspired by Big Brother. Like that is very much going hand in hand with how we started looking at other regular people as a form of entertainment. That is very embedded in the 2000s, isn't it? And there's been masterpieces done about that explore that, like The Truman Show. And then there's My Little Lie and so many different variations on Big Brother as well. Like I remember there was one when I was growing up that had all of Spain in a chokehold, which is just called The Bus. And it was like people living on the bus on the road with cameras in the bus. Great, sure, very high concept, but the theme of surveillance and voyeurism is all over the place here. Even in the Collingswood Story, there's a moment at the start of that film where it's this couple and they're sort of long distance, and the guy is really nervous that the girl is hiding something from him. There's a moment where she sort of jokingly has to buy a longer cable so she can move her computer around the house and show him around the house. And it's sort of a way of looking into her life while he's far away. And I'm not saying that the film really goes any deeper than that into like, is this a controlling relationship? No, I don't think that's what it's trying to say. But it's kind of exploring like, well, I can't be there in the room with you, but I want to see it. I want to imagine what it's like, and I want to be able to watch over you. Like they fall asleep with their webcams on, and other, Paranormal Activity and so on and other found footage films will have explored this to death. But back in 2002, it's really interesting to see how you would use and tie that into with also like being on camera all the time. It's just regular people doing boring ass shit. Like these are not interesting people. She's preparing for an exam. He's got to go to work. The possibility of being in a haunted house is the most interesting thing that's ever happened to them, guaranteed. I don't know why they're opposing it so much, because my God, their conversations are dull.
I have a real soft spot for that film. And I think it's because, I love a desktop
me too.
Story. Like a desktop horror, yeah, but like any kind of desktop story. I love games that happen on a desktop or on a phone. I love claustrophobic narratives in that way. I love like a restrictive setting. I think this is why I love a haunted house story, because it usually happens within one house. And to me, that's such a beautiful step forward, is like a haunted house story becoming like a haunted technology story, that you can't leave the technology, you can't leave the phone, you can't leave the laptop, the PC. And I also think it's so interesting because it harks back to a time which I remember distinctly, where the internet was in a room.
Oh my God, yes.
The internet, right?
Yes.
The internet was in a room in your house. The computer room in your house was where the internet lived. And if you wanted to go to the internet, you had to go into that room. And it didn't really exist outside that room. And now that seems so ludicrous. You know, we've got our phones with us literally everywhere we go. We can live stream every second of our lives. We can be online all the time. We can even be online when we're in a plane, if we're willing to pay extra for it. Like you don't have to ever go offline. So we don't think of the internet as a place that we go to. It's just, it exists. It is ghostly. It's like this kind of shadow realm that exists alongside the real world. But I think these films are set in a time where the internet was a specific place, which you could choose to go to. And many people chose not to go to. You know, it was not that unusual at the time for someone to like not have an email address, really not have ever used the internet or know how to use the internet. I think that would be seen as extremely unusual now, but at the time, not so much.
No, I'm completely in agreement with you. And it's really interesting. Again, we were talking about the tactility and the noises and the sounds of things. Like even in the Collingswood Story, which is probably like, you know, I really enjoyed it and I genuinely found it quite unsettling because I also have a soft spot for desktop based films. I even found it interesting how because it's such an early example of that, probably one of the earliest ones, it really was doing the shot reverse shot of a simple like dialogue scene, while currently in our desktop films, like usually we kind of just commit to one desktop, right? And I thought it was really interesting how basically it's just a conversation between two people with occasional like side characters that pop up on their screens, but it's constantly the same like shot reverse shot that we see. And we never actually get to see the house outside. We never actually get to see where the computer is in the house. It does fully commit to the desktop conceit, and I respect that a lot, especially because we've seen so many of these films now. Whenever any of them were on camera, particularly the female character, I was always just looking at the corners. I'm like, well, something's gonna pop up now, right? Something's gonna turn up, because it is ultimately like a haunted house movie, but it's just communicated through the internet. But the internet itself doesn't really do that much. It's just the setup. It's the gimmick, which I think if anything, it is one of the only like negatives that I would say about this film. So, I mean, it doesn't really stick the landing either, but it is essentially a very traditional haunted house story. It's just told in this aesthetically, visually innovative way that now has like this little spot of notoriety in the horror space. But if it didn't have the desktop conceit in 2002, I don't think we would be talking about this film very much.
Oh no, absolutely not. No, that's what it has going for it, for sure.
What do you think the films do with the theme and their obsession with surveillance and voyeurism? How do you think they explore these?
Oh, no, they don't do anything. They don't do anything. I would love for them to do more. And I think that potential is there. But the problem is that I don't think they actually succeed in saying anything. I think that they, in a very early 2000s way, sort of raise issues and go, yeah, look, people suck, but don't actually explore that in any way. So if we are talking about Feardotcom, there was a quote that annoyed me so much. There were two moments in this film that annoyed me so
Only
much.
Only two?
Well, yeah, again, I knew what I was getting into, so my expectations were very low, but there were two moments that actually made me like stand up and go, and these are those two moments, right? One of them is Stephen Dorff's character, whatever his name is, Bobby, who knows, is why do you think the ratings are so high on those reality disaster shows? And I was like, excuse me, those what? Those reality disaster shows? What is a reality disaster show, Stephen Dorff? Name me a single reality disaster show.
So you're talking about the news.
Exactly. Oh my God. Exactly. That is what my cishet boyfriend said. Yeah, he's like, oh, he means the news, haha. I'm like, he doesn't mean that. That's far too smart for what he meant. I don't know if he just means like a reality show like The Real World and he's saying it's a disaster, or he's saying like a reality show in which people are experiencing a natural disaster. I'm just like, it's just word salad. It's word salad. That is an attempt to say something so deep and so scathing about humanity. Everyone wants to watch a reality disaster show. And I'm like, can we pick that apart, please? What do you mean? What does that mean? It means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. And I think that's what's so frustrating about this film is it doesn't even raise interesting questions. It really, it asks what appears to be a question. And when you start to think, how shall I answer that question? You're like, well, I can't, because the question doesn't actually make sense.
It's quite interesting hearing you be so exasperated about it, because I'm almost tempted to defend these films, but I don't want to. So everything I'm going to say is with the caveat that I understand that these are not great films. That's just them's the facts. But what I found really interesting about what you were saying is like, I think it's really hard for any art to fully capture and express and interrogate big shifts in culture. And I think the big spectra that is, and the long shadow that is cast over anything that was made in the 2000s is 9/11. And I don't think these are the texts that are interrogating surveillance culture, torture culture, the way that news and pop culture became incredibly cruel and toxic, and how they all made us very comfortable with casual cruelty. And I think you can see we're just now analyzing and reckoning with what that meant for, for like women and girls and queer folk growing up in the 2000s, what that meant for pop culture figures like Britney Spears and like Paris Hilton, and what we did to them collectively, what it meant for news, what it meant for us to be receiving that and regurgitating it. And there's a lot of unpicking that we're still doing. And that is now what, like 20 years later, 25 years later. So I think that's a lot to ask of anything. In the same way that I fully think that we have not, and no piece of art has fully reckoned with what the pandemic has done to us culturally, and how it has affected different generations that have had to deal with it. Because it's just too soon. Like,
that's such a good point. Yeah, in 25 years we're going to get some really, really good pandemic work.
Like truly, like when it's in our bones, right? Because like something doesn't seep into your bones in 9 months, but the long effect and the paranoia and suspicion and cruelty that I think of when I think of the 2000s, you can absolutely now, 20 years later, think of 9/11 as a really enormous start for that culture of fear and that culture of surveillance and violence in a really publicly accepted setting. And kind of aesthetically, we can talk a lot about like news footage influencing the way that these movies were even look like, the editing being so hectic and in your face and extreme. You can probably, like, someone much smarter than me can probably look into actual data of like how many fucking energy drinks became really popular and how that might go hand in hand with the frenetic editing of the time. But what I do think contemporary work can do is like accidentally tell you what they're worried about or what they're thinking about. And there's something that all these films are concerned with that I find kind of accidentally revealing, despite themselves. Like, I don't think it's that deep. I don't think this was the intention of the filmmakers, but I think it tells us something about what it must have been like to be young, to be trying to make a movie, trying to make a horror movie in the early 2000s. So, and we're assuming that these having come out in like 2002, that they were being developed or made like between 2000 and, and 2001. And they're all really worried about not just being watched, but also about their lives just not mattering at all.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Yeah. No, I get you. No, I agree.
Like, there's this thing about, like, none of these characters are memorable, partly because they're not very well drawn or necessarily even well acted. But there's this thing of, like, they're interested in human suffering, but they're not actually interested in humans.
Yes. That's really interesting because, yeah, if we're thinking about this, the kind of post 9/11 torture porn stuff, we've got Hostel and Saw, as you mentioned, would be, I think, the really clear ones to discuss that. And I think you could, and people have make a really clear thesis that has directly led on. We have Hostel and we have Saw because we had 9/11. And because we had the black sites, we had the torture, there was the knowledge that our governments were committing torture. And this was a way of reckoning with that. So I completely agree with that. And I think that's a really interesting approach. Yeah, this kind of nihilism of maybe it is that when the millennium turned, we all thought it was going to end. We were all disaster bitches, and then it didn't. And so we were like, oh, well, what's the point? What's the point of any of it? I was ready to just throw it all into the volcano, and then what happened? But actually, as you're speaking about this, there are actually two pieces of media that have really been on my mind when I've been thinking about this episode, and they're from later. They're from 2008 and 2009, and again, not good with a capital G pieces of media, but fascinating. I recently watched this film. If anyone's seen this film, they'll be like, "Why did you do this, Kirsty?" Called Gamer. From 2009.
Yes,
Gerard
sure.
Butler.
Yes.
Do you know it?
I know, but I haven't seen it.
A fascinating, one of the worst things I've ever seen in my entire life. And the reason I watched it is my friend Susie and I have a thing that we call 20p DVD Club, which is the charity shop. The charity shop near me does 5 DVDs for £1. So the rule is you can only buy movies that you've never heard of. So I go in, and obviously they're 20p each, and then we always hope we're going to find like a hidden gem. And we have seen, I saw a very, very early Sandra Bullock film that I thought was really interesting called When the Party's Over. I saw a really early Sharon Stone film, which is appalling, but also weirdly compelling and like would watch again. Very, very strange film.
What's the name?
So the film is called Scissors. It makes zero sense. It's extremely bizarre. And again, maybe I'm just a sucker for set design, but the film ends with her being trapped in this apartment, which is this kind of impossible space and kind of goes against the laws of physics. And it turns out that she's been gaslit, essentially. But fascinating. Not good, really, but interesting. Gamer, however, not interesting, but interesting for this topic because I could not believe that it came out in 2009 because I was like, I have never seen a more early 2000s film than Gamer. So I don't know what the backstory is. Was it made earlier, or was the director just a retro kind of guy? I don't know. It is very early 2000s. And again, it is trying so hard to talk about all those things that you just talked about. It's trying so hard to talk about the violence of watching and not doing anything. It tries so hard to talk about the meaninglessness of lives and which lives we decide have meaning and which lives we decide to do not have meaning. There is even a sort of proto Elon Musk-esque figure played by Michael C. Hall. But like the narrative makes zero sense. The visuals genuinely hurt my eyes.
Oh my God, it's
ugly.
Neville Dean and Taylor. Of course it hurts your eyes. There's directors of Crank.
I know, but I feel like Crank is self-aware. Gamer is not self-aware.
Interesting. Okay.
In my opinion, it's just horrendous. I absolutely hated every second of it, but like was weirdly compelled by it as well because it felt like having a stroke or something. Like, it was just such a bizarre viewing experience. Anyway, the other one that I've been thinking about a lot is a reality show called Scream Queens. So not the Ryan Murphy drama.
I know. There was a reality TV show called Scream Queens as well.
Yeah, 2008. So I've watched it several times. It is one of the most bizarre pieces of media that I've ever seen because it is so cruel and so pointless. And the way that the women, the contestants, are treated on the show is so, again, so 2000s. They are told to be sexual and then immediately shamed for being sexual. They are told to try and do a thing, put their best effort in, and then mocked for putting effort in, which I feel like was the female experience in the 2000s, to be honest. Told to do a thing, as soon as you do the thing, oh my God, why did you do that? Don't do that. And it's fascinating. And I feel like you can tell the point in the first series where someone, a producer or someone, said, listen, guys, we can't do this. We can't broadcast this. We need to start being a bit kinder to these contestants. And then the tone changes, like the racial slurs disappear, the comments on one another's bodies and how thin or fat or pretty or not pretty they are cut right down. Fascinating stuff. I just feel like there were no checks and balances. There was certainly no, I highly doubt there was any aftercare in this show. I find the whole thing so fascinating. And again, I'm so aware of the grubbiness of my own gaze. Like, I don't usually feel guilty watching things because I tend not to watch things that I know will make me feel bad. But watching this, I was like, I feel bad. I feel bad for watching this. I feel like I'm watching somebody be exploited in a way that I'm not sure that they fully knew how to consent to. Not to belittle them. I'm sure they knew to some extent what they were getting into, but it certainly gives the impression that you are watching somebody's exploitation.
You see, I think this is the other thing that they accidentally tap into that is very, very emblematic of early 2000s culture. And I would say like early 2000s horror as well, is that at the worst of times, it's accused of being exploitative and extreme for no reason, for no narrative reason. It's basically like, you know, in no uncertain terms, people will say that films like Hostel and Saw and all of these other things like House of Wax and whatnot, and generally the horror cinema of the 2000s is like torture porn that is akin to watching snuff or a just direct exploitation, right? And I think that goes hand in hand with the first years of the internet being popular and accessible. I've talked about this a couple of times already on this show, but it was the wild, wild west. Like, it was unregulated. Like, it wasn't the dark web. Everything was dark. Everything was rotten. Like, you could really see anything. And I think there was, as there is with any new form of technology, there's always a moral panic attached to it. And the moral panic always follows the same pattern. It's always think about the kids. What are the kids watching? How are we going to control what the kids are watching? Oh my God, we're destroying our youth. The story is always the same, right? And I think all of these films kind of have the same worry too, or at least tap into that worry, right? It's like awful things are happening on the internet and your kids are watching it. Or your kids are or broadcasting it. Because My Little Lie, to a lesser degree, Collingswood Story, because that's quite a self-contained one. Although there's some really funny, freaky people who just have their webcam on 24/7 and you could just stumble on them. But in Untraceable, which comes a little bit later, and I think it's more... it's 2008, so it's just before Gamer, but also feels very early 2000s. Again, that is about a serial killer who's killing people and broadcasting on the news. In Feardotcom, that is literally as well the point. There's a serial killer broadcasting his murders through the internet. It is very law and ordery in that concern. It's like, you know what? The first thing that people are going to do when they've got access to putting stuff on the internet, to uploading things, they're going to kill people. Because
that's what bothered me about Gamer as well, is the whole concept is like, if you allow people to do whatever they want online, what are they going to do? Weird sex and violence. And maybe I'm naive. I just don't think that that's true. I don't think that's what some people want to do online. That's not what the majority of people want to do online. And I actually really miss anonymous internet, and not for any kind of dark or creepy reason. I just miss like the DIY-ness, the DIY aesthetic, the fact that everything wasn't centralized and commercialized and part of some big conglomerate. I miss that. I miss those early days of the internet. I don't know if we can get that back, but I would love to.
I think like that's why some websites like Omegle or Omegle or however you pronounce that have become quite popular, because they are that random stumbling across weird people on the internet, possibly chatting with them element that we've completely lost, because now it's evolved. We're in a different place. And I think these films are all very, very panicky and very extreme about it, because they're trying to make a story out of it. What I do find quite interesting, and I wanted to get your thoughts on, is despite the fact that all of these films are dealing with the internet or using the internet as a key mechanism to progress or push the story forward, they all still need a very classic horror film anchor. You've got the serial killer, you've got a ghost, a haunted house, and I wonder, why do you think these films still go back to something that's very embodied and very traditional in horror?
That's true, they do, don't they? I think because, this is in my opinion, I think that horror is a very useful psychological genre. It allows us to do a lot of things. My personal experience is that horror people, so people who create or consume horror, tend to be nice. They tend to be nice people. People who spend their time watching the most fucked up shit you can possibly imagine tend to actually be really nice, tend to be quite psychologically aware. This is a vast generalization, because they have accepted the possibilities of humanity, but they have chosen differently. So I don't know if you've heard of the phrase, the imp of the perverse. So I think it's translated from French or something, a slightly strange phrase in English, but the imp of the perverse is that little voice in your head that when you cross a bridge while texting, it says, you could throw your phone in the river. You could. Or, if you're up on a high balcony, it's like, you could jump off. You could.
That's a much nicer way to talk about intrusive thoughts.
Yeah, well, exactly. But it's apparently they're not psychologically unhealthy. It's your brain making you aware of the possibilities, but also reminding you of what is a good choice and what is not a good choice. And I'm really fond of that. And I think that for me, people who are really, really drawn to horror, you might think are, disturbed people or not psychologically astute people. And I think it's quite the opposite. I think being drawn to horror is a bit of an imp of the perverse. It's your brain saying, I could make this choice. I could make a choice to be violent or cynical, or to choose not to connect with my fellow humans, but to actually destroy my fellow humans. But I am choosing not to. I'm aware that it's possible. I'm aware that I could do that, but I'm choosing not to. So I actually think it's a really psychologically healthy thing. I also think horror is a way for us to talk about things that are very, very difficult to accept. If we think about any, I could name literally any classic horror movie, Carrie, The Shining, even ones that are not based on books by Stephen King, just any horror. And like, what's the real horror of The Shining? It's about an abusive man. It's about an abusive husband and father. Do we want to think that our fathers and husbands and the people who we allow into our lives and close to our children and share our bodies and our beds and our lives with could abuse us? No, we don't want to think about that. It was a ghost. A ghost did it. A ghost made him do it. He's possessed. The hotel's possessed. So I think horror can be many, many things, but I think it can be a way for us to look slightly askance or look at a slight slant at the true, true darkness of what humanity is capable of, and to almost soften it for ourselves a little bit, that we can say, yeah, people do kill each other. They do hurt each other. But in this example, it's not because, humanity is set to destroy ourselves and each other. It's because a ghost made them do it. A haunted house made them do it. A curse made them do it. So I think it helps us to lift up the rock and look underneath, but not look directly at it. Look at it slightly out of the corners of our eyes. So that is my thought of why we have to tie it onto this kind of classic horror movie thing. It's because it's really, really hard to look directly at it.
That's really interesting. Particularly because of the way that these films have aged and the perception of them has aged, is that they're unrelentingly and unnecessarily cruel and violent for no reason. But they end up trying to do the same thing that all classic horror films have done. And I wonder as well, we joked at the start that the 2000s, the Y2K culture has now been coming back as an aesthetic. And I really shudder whenever I go onto something like ASOS and you see Y2K as an aesthetic. You see that as a category of type of clothes that you can search for and buy. But we've also seen that a little bit in the horror films that have been made more recently, that are not only just set in the 90s, but are set in this particular changeover from the late 90s into the early 2000s. And I'm even thinking of something that is quite literally called Y2K, the horror film starring Rachel Ziegler. And I wonder what do you think about what contemporary films trying to emulate the 2000s are getting right or wrong?
Well, I have not seen a wide enough selection to properly sum it up, but I will say of the ones that I have seen, I think it's pure aesthetic, unfortunately. I don't think they're actually inhabiting the headspace. Not only the headspace of the time, but even the headspace of now looking back. Because I think, I hate to call it historical because it makes me feel ancient. I know, it makes me feel so old. But, even if we're looking further back, if we write about the Victorian era, if we write about ancient Egypt, whatever era we're writing about now. We're thinking about now. And we're projecting our own thoughts and feelings about that past time based on what we know now. So when we choose to set a story in 2001, we really are writing about now and the nostalgia, whether or not it's accurate. Nostalgia is rarely accurate. The nostalgia that we have for that time. And I personally, and I'm perfectly willing to say that there are examples that I simply haven't come across and I would be keen to watch them. I haven't seen anything that goes beyond aesthetics, and also not, to me, a convincing aesthetic, because I think where people go wrong with doing these historical these historical pieces is in 2001, not everybody wore clothes from 2001. People wore clothes.
Very true.
I was dressing like I was in the 90s because the 90s were like 2 years ago. So, you would still obviously wear a dress that was from 1999 because it's 2 years old. And there wasn't really the fast fashion. Like, if I look back at old magazines, I can't believe how much clothes used to cost. They used to cost the same as they cost now, not taking inflation into account, because you wouldn't buy a top to go out on a night out and then throw it away the next day, because things just cost a higher proportion of your income, as they should, because it costs resources to make these things. So nothing seems to me to go beyond aesthetics. I think there are many, many films that do nail an aesthetic. I personally haven't seen one that nails the early 2000s aesthetic, but I think the key is that things didn't just spring up overnight. If you want to set something, say, in the 80s, you can't have all your architecture, your cars, your fashion, your music, your films that people are watching be from that year, because it doesn't work that way. We right now I had to check what year it was there, in 2025, are watching films from 2002 because that's what people do. I am currently wearing a pair of jeans that I've had for 10 years because that's what people do.
That's some good quality jeans right there.
Good quality jeans, right? They're not skinnies. I'm not ready. I'm not ready for skinny jeans to come back in.
We're not going back there.
Oh, I can't. Low rise, please.
No,
I'm 41. I'm not doing low rise. If you can rock it, have at it. It's not for me. Because people don't do that. You know, the world doesn't just spring up overnight and we're suddenly wearing the fashions, using the slang, watching the films, listening to the music of today. So to me, that's the issue, that if you're going to do a 2002 thing, and I think actually that's what's good about all of these films. I'm even going to say it's good about Feardotcom, is you don't look at any of the fashion and think, wow, so 2002. They're just clothes. People are just wearing like jeans and a top. Could be, you could wear it now walking down the street and nobody would think twice. Nobody would think that you were doing 2002 fashion. You would just be wearing jeans and a top. So I think that's one of the differences between things that were actually set in that era and things that are trying to hark back to that era. That was a very long-winded way of saying the fashion's off, the vibe's off.
I think that's a very astute observation, but I would also add something we've been talking about in this conversation is that we now know that that moral panic did not come true. So it's quite difficult to think, to be worried about the computer turning against us. We now know that a calculator or a toaster is not going to kill us because of a timing issue. But what we don't have is that sincerity, both in the positive and the negative. The cruelty is tongue-in-cheek and the sincerity is tongue-in-cheek, right? Everything is just a little too mannered and a little too fake to actually have that edge and that sickly sheen. And there's a few films, and I think like just around like 2010, 2011, those films still had that edge. Like films that have nothing to do with technology, but like even something like Chronicle, right? Which is a superhero horror movie. It has that scumminess of the early 2000s. And I think it's because it's coming from a real place, from a real darkness. Whereas, and I watched Y2K with open eyes and an open heart, and I was thinking, I was like, damn, you really missed the mark there, because this is just, it's just aesthetics. And it's aesthetics looking at it through nostalgia. And you're just more interested in the neck chokers than you are into what it must have felt like to really be celebrating the turn of the millennium, being a teenager and having the New Year's Eve party to end all New Year's Eve parties.
Yeah, I completely agree. And also before we move on, I forgot to tell you the other thing in Fear.com that literally made me stand up out of my seat and shout no.
Tell me.
Shout no at the TV, is the scene where one of the characters goes to the website and this is what they type in to the address bar: fear.com.com. I was like, I simply can't. I can't. Fear.com.com?
I love it. And we haven't talked about this film nearly enough, but in Untraceable, there is a whole department led by Diane Lane, one of those beautiful women that ever existed, being forced to exist in a basement where she's tapping away little URLs into her computer, just being given a post-it with a URL written on it, fully with the www.killwithme.com.
Did it have the http://
Not on the post-it.
Oh,
that would have pushed me over the edge.
Oh,
I think there's a naivete around technology in these films that I find quite endearing. But also, what I find really endearing, genuinely, it's not just a technological naivete. It's the fact that that they just think of the worst thing that you could do with this newfound technology.
Yes, you're right. That's what bothers me as well. I'm so over this cynicism about humanity, and I was really hoping that post-pandemic. Are we really post-pandemic? Well, depends how we're defining it, but I just don't think, and it's kind of ruined post-apocalyptic stories for me, which is not a genre I've ever particularly enjoyed. because I think the basis of a post-apocalyptic story is that people will immediately turn on each other, form factions, fight over basic resources, and it will be survival of the fittest. Fittest in massive air quotes. And I think what lockdown showed us, or showed me, is that people don't really do that. You know, where I lived, people were, and it wasn't a particularly close area. I didn't really know my neighbors, but people were doing shops for their neighbors. They were getting medicines for people that were vulnerable. There was loads of stuff online, sharing resources, sharing food. If people had just basic stuff like paracetamol, plasters, whatever, does anybody want to share this? I think people really did their best. And I think in times of crisis, yes, it can bring out the worst in us. But I think overall, I do genuinely believe that most people are good. I do. And I think times of crisis show us goodness. And I just don't believe that most people are using the internet right now for violence and sex, violence and like weird sex. Not that there's anything wrong with weird sex, actually, but I just don't think people are. I think humanity contains multitudes, and I don't know if any of these stories really convey that.
So what you're saying is that we and the internet are a lot nicer than Feardotcom wants us to believe we are.
Yes, I do think that. And I think that comes back to this like early 2000s. It's like the kind of, I don't even know, surely there's a term for it, the kind of like gross sincerity. There's like it's not skepticism, because it's a genuine belief that humanity is rotten to the core. And if you give us a chance, if you like let the reins off, it's quite right wing, actually, this idea that like if you let the reins off people, they will give in to their basest impulses. And I just don't think that that's true. I'd agree.
I do think there's like an underlying conservatism in all of these films that people need to be policed and controlled, because if they aren't, whatever good thing, in this case, it's the internet and technology, if you give them a good thing, they'll find a way to make it dark and ruinous and rotten and use it to abuse other people.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't subscribe to that personally.
Before we wrap up, Kirsty, are there any other films outside of the ones that we mentioned from this era and sort of in this vein that you would also not recommend people check out?
Oh my goodness. I thought you were going to ask me. I've got some that I would recommend.
Go for it. I mean, a lot of these are, and I don't believe in guilty pleasures, but like, you know, come on. If you want to spend your evening with 13 ghosts, first of all, email me what you thought. But it's a choice, and we just have to live with our choices, you know?
I will say one of my, it's not a guilty pleasure. One of the films that I have seen, maybe more than anyone has seen, including possibly the director,
I'm so ready.
Is the film Gothica. I have seen Gothica maybe 30 times. With my one wild and precious life, Anna, I have watched Gothica probably 30 times. I couldn't tell you why. I really couldn't.
Excellent.
I genuinely love it. Like, I don't think it's good, but I love it. I don't recommend anybody watch it. It's not really about technology, but it has impeccable trash 2000s horror vibes.
Excellent.
I love it. So don't know if I would recommend it, but I will say, if you're in Club Gothica, have you seen it more than me? Has my crown, should I pass my Gothica crown on to someone else? In which case, fair. I think that's understandable. The ones that I would recommend, I'm a fan of Unfriended and Unfriended Dark Web. I think they're really interesting. I know we both love Host. I think Host is very good. Yeah, really, really good film. I know you're a fan of Cam as well. I think Cam is way smarter than I anticipated that it was going to be, which maybe says more about me than anything else. But I thought it was really, really interesting, genuinely creepy, and asked and answered some really interesting questions, in my opinion. And there are two films that I think are not very well known, but I have a lot of time for them. And one of them is this film called Ratter, Ratter. And it's, again, would I say it's a good film? Maybe not. But I found it interesting because it's about a woman played by Ashley Benson who is stalked by someone, we don't know who, and I don't care that we don't know who, I think that makes it creepier, through her various devices that have cameras on them. So like her Xbox Connect, her mobile phone, her laptop, anything that's got a camera on it. And what I think is, I mean, it's not that exciting of a film because it's basically just like a young woman who's just moved to New York, like going about her daily life. But what's so interesting about it is it plays around a lot with like camera angles because, you know, it's like if her phone's in her bag under the desk, you just see like the underneath of the desk that she's working at. So there's lots of like weird angles on things, or like if she's talking on the phone, it will like flip between the kind of the two cameras, the front and back facing camera. And I think it just made me so aware of how I carry a camera and listening device with me everywhere I go at all times. And I know that is not a new thought, but it made me so visibly, acutely aware of how much I just have this thing on me at all times. And if anyone wanted to get a glimpse into my life, it would be extremely easy to do so. So I found that interesting just on that level. And there's also one that's just really fun, I think, called Deadstream. Have you seen it? It's about this sort of disgraced YouTuber. And the whole thing is his live stream of him like going into this haunted house, and he's doing it to sort of rehabilitate himself. And it's got a real like Evil Dead vibe. It's very self-aware. It doesn't have that kind of naivete that we're talking about, this kind of early 2000s sincerity. It's very tongue-in-cheek. It's very self-aware. But I think the way it nails online culture and the way that people talk to streamers and talk with streamers, I think it's really interesting. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'll be talking about Deadstream later on in this series.
Oh,
and
nice.
I wanted to bring up, actually, I've mentioned it offhandedly, but of the era, I genuinely think that 13 Ghosts, which came out 2001, it goes hand in hand with Fear.com. Like, if you want to watch the most unhinged early 2000s, like, give yourself a stroke kind of brand of editing, 13 Ghosts and Fear.com is a choice, an excellent choice for some people. And I have such a soft spot for it, primarily because, like, I just don't, that is such a distinct era, such a distinct style, and such a distinct amount of maximum effort for minimum results that we very rarely see it. Like, the only comparable now that I can think of is like some of the superhero movies, the least successful ones, where it's like $300 million spent on something that doesn't make a lick of sense, that nobody likes, nobody enjoyed being in, and nobody has anything good to say about it, neither the people who were involved or the people watching it. And it's just that, but with horror, and it's all a little bit steampunky and a little bit dark webby, and a little bit also still trying to revive the classic Gothic stories. And very often just casting amazing actors. Like, the lead in 13 Ghosts is Tony Shalhoub, you know? And it's got F. Murray Abraham. Like, what are we talking about? What are we even doing here?
I've got a lot of time for that film as well, actually. I really like it. And also it makes me think of Julia Armfield, your friend and mine,
Yes.
brilliant novelist, has this bit that always cracks me up, which is that when titles have a number in them, she says the number in full. So she would say like the 13 and Ghosts, or she does like the 7 and it just, I'm such a child sometimes when it comes to humor, and it just, every time she says the 7 and just gets me. I love it.
And I think that there's such a huge, found footage in particular has always been really, probably the most like technologically astute subgenre. So from the Collingswood Story, there's so many other iterations on the found footage surveillance theme, especially Paranormal Activity. And I have a lot of time for them. I find them really fascinating because I think surveillance is such a constant in our lives, and self-surveillance and self-filming is the other interesting bit that is very new now. That there's, again, this naivete of just being filmed through home cameras or through like the street camera, so even in a Big Brother type artificial situation, it still feels more naive than what we're doing to ourselves today.
Yes. I'm also a big Paranormal Activity fan. I can't really explain why I like them so much. Maybe I just like those big American houses. But they're like a real comfort watch for me. I really enjoy them.
So before we wrap up, Kirsty, is there anything else about any of these films or this moment in horror film history that you wanted to mention?
That I think we should leave it. Leave it where it is.
Nothing good can come out of that big a sigh.
No, I don't know. I think that if we're going to do early 2000s set horror, I think we have to be real with ourselves and say we're never, like you say, we're never going to be able to get into that mindset that we were back then. But we can get into a very comparable mindset. And the comparable mindset now is AI and LLMs. So if we want to write a story that's about the millennium and Y2K and everybody panicking that everything's going to break, really we should be honest that in that case we're writing about AI. We're writing about the fears of now, but we're setting it in the past, which is all we can ever do. We can't do other than write about now because we live now, and we can, for better or worse, either take comfort or terrify ourselves with nostalgia. But ultimately, we are living in the world now. So I'm not saying don't do an early 2000 aesthetic. I mean, I am desperate for a remake of Feardotcom, but about the way that we use the internet now. You can still set it in the early 2000s if you want to, but it needs to think about the concerns that we have now. That would be my thought on it. Let's be real about what we're actually talking about.
I love that. Kirsty, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. And where can listeners find more of your work online?
Well, I'm not going to be online because I'm too busy watching 13 Ghosts. No, they can find, of course, my book. So my most recent book, No and Other Love Stories, does have a story in it dealing with technology. It has a story about two women who dress up as people's dead ex-girlfriends in order to make various pieces of content. And it sort of plays around with this idea of haunting and the kind of haunted internet a little bit. So definitely something that I am interested in. And we also have some late 90s and early 2000s set horror going on in that book. So very much my vibe. So you can find me by reading my books. You can find me at kirstylogan.com, or I am Kirsty Logan, Kirsty with a Y, and Logan as in Wolverine on Instagram and on Twitter, although I am not really there very often. So if you want to chat, do drop me an email. Let me know if I need to give up my Gothica superfan crown.
Amazing. I hope you hold on to that. Actually, maybe I hope you don't hold on to that crown.
Yeah, it's probably for the best.